Now, how seriously should we be taking these leaked Brexit analysis reports? These are from the Department of Exiting the European Union, with the Cabinet Office and the Treasury reportedly both involved. Barney, Scholes and Christys join me now. Barney, let's start with you. This is a bad day for Brexit, would you say?
I'd say it's certainly new information that we didn't have, during the time of the referendum, for example. We can see very clearly now this is the government's own modelling here. This was coordinated by the department responsible for delivering Brexit, and they themselves are clearly saying internally that every model of Brexit, whether that be leaving the single market and the customs union, crashing out onto WTO terms, every single model leaves us worse off. Even the government supposedly preferred model of securing a free trade deal with the EU leaves us around 5% worse off over the next 15 years in terms of GDP growth.
You guys at Open Britain have been making the point of Brexit being a fundamentally negative thing for the UK. This must be, in a way, a validation of all the points you've been making. Were you surprised at the extent of the loss in UK growth?
Not particularly, because I think we heard a lot during the referendum from people like Michael Gove saying we don't want to listen to experts anymore. But what we're seeing actually is that the kind of forecasts that we saw during the referendum that were often dismissed as project fear are becoming project reality. We're seeing that the reality of Brexit is a serious consequential hit to the economy of this country. That means people's jobs, that means people's livelihoods, that means money for public services. So to an extent it's a validation, but I think that anybody who's studied this subject or is involved in it in any way knows, even the people that are pro-Brexit, I think, know that the damage it will do to the economy of the country. But they're kind of more focused on the ideological vision rather than the economics of it.
Patrick, ideological vision, obviously a validation over here of perhaps the realities of Brexit. What do you see in this report? Is this something that's just a big media furore around it?
Needless to say, I'm in disagreement, I'm afraid, but I believe it's a load of hogwash, really. I do think it's kind of Project Fear Mark 2. It's been drawn up by a group of civil servants who in themselves, I believe, are very anti-Brexit because they don't like radical change. And I don't understand why the wider public gives any credence to these reports whatsoever. We've seen them in the run-up
from the Department for Leaving the EU in association with the Treasury and the Cabinet Office.
Yes, but they've not got... I think there's a bit of a Ramona push here to try and sway public opinion into wanting a second referendum, which I don't believe they would win. I can't really get my head around why people give much credence to these reports at all. They've been proved wrong before. These so-called experts weren't big enough to predict the global economic crash. They weren't big enough to predict what happened just after the referendum vote when there was supposed to be a year-long recession, there's supposed to be 800,000 job losses. Why on earth do the public think that they've got this one right? I don't agree at all.
Well, let's just look at the facts of it. According to this analysis put forward by Dexia, or rather leaked by Buzzfeed today, no deal would see a minus 8% cut in UK growth. This is compared to current forecasts in the past 15 years. That's enormous. Interestingly, though, if we continued single market access, which is, of course, something that a lot of Remain voting MPs are now pushing for, at least or customs union single market, that would still be a minus 2% loss in growth. I mean, does that surprise you? Because to some extent, for the Remain camp now, there's been a sort of an argument that if we continue in the single market customs union, it will be all roses, it will be great.
Well, no, I don't think that's a fair characterisation, actually, of what we've been saying. I campaigned very passionately to remain in the European Union. Obviously, the result of the referendum wasn't what I wanted it to be, but I do accept that that was the way the public voted. However, what we've been trying to say is that in order to avoid the complete devastation that a hard Brexit would involve, staying in the single market and the customs union at least minimises that damage to a certain extent. And I think that's what you can see from this report. If you look at every scenario outside of the single market and the customs union, it's much, much worse than if we were to stay in the single market and the customs union.
15 years, though, this is trying to predict into the future of the economy.
This is the point, isn't it? 15 years. How on earth, if we couldn't predict what was around the corner in the run-up to the Brexit referendum, how on earth can these people pull out a crystal ball and start predicting 15 years into the future?
Well, I think the hole in that argument has been picked at already, which is that this is a report coordinated by the department responsible for delivering Brexit. So that's a department led by David Davis. One of his senior ministers.
By Ramona and Theresa May, of course.
But he's also got one of his ministers, Steve Baker, who's the ex-chair of the European Research Group, a very, Eurosceptic grouping of Conservative MPs. So what reason would people like that have, who are committed to the idea of Brexit? What reason would they have to provide completely misleading, false information about the damage this will do to our economy.
Which is a fair point. Why would the civil service go about, in effect, putting down the UK's
I think
potential?
it's been widely reported that civil service are broadly a Remain institution that are pulling the strings behind.
Saboteurs sort of
Well, I
undermining...
think potentially because Brexit represents to them an absolutely radical change, which is not what they are geared up to. And this business of it being 15 years in the future, it's all based on a hypothetical set of circumstances. So even if there is no ulterior motive here, even if this is just straight down the barrel line that predicts this, the fundamental levels of their predictions have got to be way off, because how on earth can they know who will be striking up trade deals with, how lucrative those will be, and what the positive benefits of Brexit will be? They can't quantify it. I think here they've gone overly conservative, and I do think, as I've said, it is kind of a bit of a Remainer push.
Come in quickly on the trade deals point, because I actually think that's a very interesting point, and the analysis itself did actually go in some detail about, even if we were to get, because one of the arguments in favour of Brexit, I'm sure Patrick will put forward, is that we'll be able to secure all these great free trade deals with, Donald Trump's America, with China, etc., etc. What this analysis actually showed is, even if we were able to do that, even if we were to get a bells and whistles trade deal with Donald America First Trump, that the impact on the UK economy would be minimal, so actually less than 1%.
And
0.2%. It's wrong to say you can't quantify that. You can. You can point out evidence of previous trade deals. Trade experts have gone into detail on it. You absolutely can quantify the impact that trade deals will have.
I would point to the evidence of previous predictions being absolutely monumentally way off the mark. And
so do you think then, let's just take the trade argument. The US, if the UK managed to forge a trade...
A hypothetical trade.
A hypothetical. The analysis here says that it would only be a 0.2% GDP boost in this 15-year prediction.
Yeah, but that's based on a set of circumstances that we don't know what's going to happen. And also, if you look at us being tied in with the European Union, we would be in a single market. Now, the European Union's economy is not growing anywhere near as fast, for example, as obviously vast parts of Asia. So if we're tied in with the European Union, then it means that we can't go and strike up potentially massively lucrative trade deals with a part of the world that is growing quicker than the European Union can ever hope to.
0.2% GDP, though, isn't particularly impressive, and it's certainly not going to recoup the losses of not being in the single market.
My point is I kind of fundamentally reject the figure, because I don't really think it's got any base whatsoever.
Let's just look at actually where the source of this was from, and indeed the response from Steve Baker today, who's obviously the Parliamentary Under-Secretary for Department of Leaving the European Union. He said he hadn't seen the reactor reports until today, and he went on to say civil service forecasts are always wrong, or tend to always have been wrong. What do you think it strikes of a certain discord or lack of communication that the Undersecretary hasn't actually seen these reports until today?
Absolutely, and I think it's quite a bizarre situation when you've got a Minister of the Crown, a government minister, saying that all government forecasts are always wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not quite sure how they make any policy ever then in that case. But I think what you're seeing here is someone, Steve Baker, who's committed to a vision of a ideological hard Brexit that he's been campaigning for years. To be fair to him, he's totally honest about that's what he wants. And what he's got here is very detailed economic analysis from his own government that undermines the economic argument for what he's pushing. So what I think you're seeing is a sort of, if you want, a cognitive dissonance. He doesn't like the fact that this is the economic reality of Brexit, so he's kind of rejecting it. But I think you'd see what I was entertained by is Steve Baker says all economic growth forecasts are wrong. You can't trust them. However, growth forecasts suggest that 90% of growth in the world economy will happen outside the EU. That's what he said. So by his own logic, if growth forecasts are always wrong, how can he know that?
But that's based on a precedent, isn't it, of course, because you can actually quantify what has gone on in those parts of the world for many, many years, whereas now we are dealing with a hypothetical set of economic circumstances as to what Britain's relationship will be outside of the European Union, a situation that hasn't happened before. So I think that's where the difference is there.
What's also been reported in this Buzzfeed article is that this assessment was not made public, according to a DexU source, because it's embarrassing. What actually is going to be the impact of this report, do you reckon? Politically, public mood? Patrick, is this going to go anywhere? How, regardless of where you see the hollowness of this report, it is nonetheless another headline. It's a departmental analysis. It's a governmental analysis. Surely it's going to have some sway. Well, particularly we're talking about customs union, single market, second referendum.
I mean, I suppose it depends, doesn't it, really? It depends on whether or not the public has the same attitude as me and can maybe see through it and maybe see its shortcomings. But I'm not sure, really, what impact it will have. I mean, Theresa May is already... it's kind of like the blind leading the blind at the minute in government. I think I use the analogy, she's a bit like an old pet. Unfortunately, she's gone off her food a bit. She's stopped wanting to go for long walks. You know, she needs to be taken out. I think she's really kind of not really leading us in the right direction. I think maybe a prediction like this could enhance calls from people like Jacob Rees-Mogg to have a change in leadership, a fresh approach to Brexit, and really kind of try to rejuvenate Britain's approach to the whole deal.
Barney, where do you see this going?
Well, I think that it's, as I said at the beginning of the interview, it's another example of a Brexit fact that people were told during the referendum that there were going to be £350 million extra a week for the NHS. That was plastered across a giant bus that they drove all over the country, and the reality of it is that there's not going to be any extra money for the NHS. Public services are going to suffer as a result of this. We've already seen EU staff leaving the NHS at incredibly high numbers, increased massively since the result of the referendum. So I think it will have cut through. Sorry.
I think there's an overestimation from people about the economic side behind the Brexit argument. Actually, one of the main reasons why people voted Brexit was to get back control of borders, was to get back control of our judiciary. And really now we're putting a lot of emphasis on what the financial, alleged, I would argue, incorrect financial proclamations of Brexit are going to be. And actually, I don't think they were the main reasons, or one of the main reasons, but not entirely the main reason behind the Brexit vote.
Nonetheless, they'll be, obviously, in real terms, what will be hitting people in their pockets is probably what they're going to be caring about quite a lot.
But it's not necessarily true, is it? Because we could, all of a sudden, we could save things like, so Tim Martin, for example, the Wetherspoons boss, fantastic businessman, he is saying that we could save £200 million a week just by cutting food costs, by reducing tariffs on food coming into Britain. There's obviously as well James Dyson, who's in charge of one of the European Union's fastest growing businesses. He's saying that he's already trading with the European Union under WTO rules and he's doing very, very well for himself. I don't think...
The reason James Dyson's trading with the EU under WTO rules is because he's outsourced all of his businesses out the UK, by the way.
I feel we could go into this, segue into another conversation very quickly. But Barney and Patrick, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.